You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoy the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast. I have a fellow podcaster and scientist and interesting guy, Matty Lansdown. He's down in Australia. His website is mattylansdown.com. That's MattyLansdown.com. And he runs the How to Not Get Sick and Die podcast, which I guess is a thing that everyone wants, hopefully. So, Matty, thanks for coming.
Thanks so much for inviting me on the show. And fellow podcaster, thank you also for being a guest on my show as well. So I'm really grateful for your time.
Yeah. Well, what got you into podcasting? I've been asked that before. What's your story?
What got me into podcasting? That's a good question. So I guess as I've sort of grown up, and I'm 30 now, and in my 20s, I sort of went through this journey of self-exploration, and I knew that I wanted to have sort of an impact on the world. And, I was trying to figure out how to best work with my personality to get results. I was listening to all these entrepreneurs and health people and fitness and, lifestyle optimization gurus. And I sort of figured out, I guess, that everybody's personality is slightly different, although we all kind of fall into some general categories. And what could I do in order to, enjoy the tasks that I was doing on a daily basis, rather than, being like, I guess the normal comment is the corporate 9-to-5 slave. I have a very extroverted personality. I'm very social, and I get a lot of my energy from social situations and communication with other people. I've been a musician since I was 13, performing on stage, and I thought, so I got into public speaking, and that just led me naturally to podcasting, because I can write Instagram posts all day, but it does not excite me in the slightest to be sort of putting words into text. So podcasting just made sense, is that I love to talk and I can talk for days. So why not record it?
Yeah, no, that's great. And why the name? Why How to Not Get Sick and Die? Just because it's your health angle, or is there, some sinister background thing?
Well, I guess I going on with the personality thing is that I was, I guess, trying to figure out who I needed to be in order to succeed, right? In any context. And once I really just sort of accepted myself for who I was, and that, I'm a scientist and I'm relatively highly educated, but I really don't take any of that stuff too seriously. And I just love having fun. Like, I literally just love having a good time. And I was looking through names, and every time I said the name to someone before I started, people just laughed. And I was like, that's how I want to approach the health conversation. Like, it's not this super serious, scary thing. It's just like, it's basic. Health is basic. Most people know that fruits and vegetables are what's up, and it's just about helping people communicate, or helping to communicate that in a way that's not like end of the earth, you're going to die kind of thing, so it's just about harnessing my personality in the name, but also being really clear in that everything I share on the show is going to enhance your biology in a way that leads to avoiding or delaying dying, right?
Oh, that's good. That's good. You're right. It's nice, because a lot of the other podcasts, they all have positive messages, how to flourish, how to this, that, and the other. But I guess this is a right angle way of getting to the same thing. I like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the people you have on the show, Is there like a genre of person? Is it more naturopathic or functional medicine people, or is it traditional clinician? Do you get?
I guess there's a natural health lean. I myself am out at, like, I work in a cancer research hospital, sort of during the most days, and it was through that journey that I sort of had my own epiphanies about health and about disease and about all the precursors that lead to these catastrophic diseases. And it's actually working in the conventional medical system. And I grew up with my mum as a nurse and sort of, believing in the conventional dogma around medicine. And it was actually not until I worked in the hospital that I currently work in and have for years now that I realized that natural health really does have a place, and holistic health has a place that's far greater than we currently allow it to have. And that's not saying that conventional Western medicine has its place. It certainly does, but I guess it's understanding that conventional medicine was put together in response to acute and emergency situations, and we're now in an era of chronic disease and multiple chronic diseases, and the pill for an ill model just does not work. And natural health interventions have always dealt with causation, which is something that Western medicine does not deal with. They just deal with suppression or management of symptoms in most cases. But natural medicine has always, for thousands of years, and now it's sort of being shifted out of the woo-woo category due to conventional medicine and science being able to prove its functionality. And so that's the guests on the podcast definitely have a natural lean, but the people that are my own personal mentors are guys just like me that, were cancer scientists or professors or doctors or, whichever disease or field for 20 or 30 years, and sort of had the courage to stand up and say, we can do things a bit better if we do the stuff that we weren't taught at medical school, which is, diet and lifestyle changes, which are fundamentally the causes of most disease. And the World Health Organization says that on their website too, that that two of the top causes of cancer are diet and lifestyle, yet no medical student gets educated in the slightest in those two aspects of cancer. And, and this conversation spreads across all diseases, because fundamentally most diseases are, and that was one of my big epiphanies, is that, realizing that firstly, we're not taught about, diet and lifestyle. And secondly, most of the problems that we experience within our biology are results of diet and lifestyle. So I do have conventional GPs and clinicians on the show, absolutely, because I love to talk both sides of the conversation, and that side of the conversation is extraordinarily relevant because that's how our system functions. So it's just, I just really believe that we're at a stage where the Western medicine piece of the pie is just massively overstated.
Well, why is it that traditional medicine doesn't educate doctors on nutrition and lifestyle? Why is that? I mean, it seems to be like if you don't think that's important, or you haven't been trained to think that's important, I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, me too. And the interesting thing is that I didn't really realize that it was crazy. I grew up, my mum's a nurse. I grew up in a small town, so I went to work with my mum a lot. So I guess, quote unquote, the indoctrination of belief happened for me at a very young age. And I was, I just assumed that what must currently exist is the best thing for humans. And that's, we get indoctrinated with that belief about the system, long before we have the free thinking capability to understand business and corporate interest, which is which really, it really tars the conversation puts the conversation in a different light. And so, why don't they get educated in those fields? That's a bit of a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. But which goes down the corporate interest conversation, because it just doesn't make any sense as to why diet and lifestyle cause disease or most disease, and they're not educated in that field. So, there's a lot of different theories as to why that is. But the good thing is, thanks to the internet providing so many people a platform, is that we're getting more and more GPs and clinicians and consultants and professors and, scientists that have an Instagram account or a YouTube following that are able to educate on this stuff, that are able to go and get themselves educated on this stuff, which is what I did, and therefore take a more holistic approach to the conversation.
Well, like the trials, there's been no clinical trial that no one should drink water because it hasn't been proven.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another sort of part of the conversation is, so I spent a bit of time working with like supplement companies, and that really opened my eyes as to where where corporate funding or research grants come from. And there's sort of, it's sort of a go-to argument for a lot of people, whether they're in the medical and science field at all or not, to say things like, well, show me the research or show me the studies. And the reality is that stuff costs lots of money. And who's funding research is the people that have an interest in the outcome. And cancer's, a multi-billion-dollar industry, if not trillion-dollar industry. And helping people heal and get better through buying, cabbage is not hugely profitable. It doesn't have a corporate dollar interest at the end of it that's really going to change anybody's profit line. And that's what, there's a lot of research into fasting and intermittent fasting, which I'm a big proponent of. And who makes money out of people not eating? Not only do they not take drugs, but they don't even spend money on food. But that's a huge part of health, is what's happening to the body when we're not eating. So there haven't been a lot of the studies that are necessary on this type of stuff because nobody's willing to provide the dollars, and you need dollars to make it happen. However, what natural medicine and natural health and nutrition is sort of pull on in regards to research is, well, we haven't done it in the conventional setting, but we have 10,000 years of doctor passing of Chinese medical doctor or nutrition expert passing it to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. And these modalities have existed for much, much longer. We call them alternative, but they've been used for thousands of years longer than the 150-year-old Western medical system, where to me it's like Western medicine's kind of alternative if we measure it on a spectrum of time. And so what I love is that Western medicine is actually, and science is getting to a point where, people can, that, like I said, with the internet, we're collecting these brains together that allow people with money and natural interests and true interests in human health and human development to be able to fund these alternative, quote unquote, alternative studies and find, oh, wow, did you know that what we've been saying for 10,000 years now has some scientific validity?
Yeah, that's great. How do you work in the hospital then? I mean, don't you feel like cognitive dissonance working there, and they're in one paradigm and you understand at least one other?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. So it took me a long time because I was very much about Western medicine, and it took me a long time to convince myself, going through nutrition research and sort of, the last 100 years worth of information about how the pharmaceutical companies and how the hospitals and medical system came to be. And so it was through learning about this that, the whole time I was like, no, this can't be right. This can't be right. And so it took me a lot of years to convince myself. But the reason that I'm still there is because the most important part of what I've learned is that belief systems about your personal reality is what governs everything. And no alternative health modality or nutritional intervention is ever going to help somebody that believes that the doctor and that medicine will. They're going to get the best results from walking into a hospital. You have to believe in the process. You have to believe in your current paradigm of reality in all facets. And that's most well explained by the placebo effect. The placebo effect is literally what they can't seem to replicate because it's about belief, and it's very hard to measure, right? Because it's got a very complex array of molecules and emotions that facilitate belief, and there's a lot of variables that facilitate belief. So belief is the most important thing. So whilst I say these things about Western medicine and alternative medicine, I just think the piece of the pie that Western medicine has is too big. I don't think it's irrelevant.
What kind of contribution do you want to make? Have you thought about how do you want to influence people's health, and how do you want to influence medicine?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it's more helping people never have to walk in the front door of the cancer hospital. That's the thing because the thing that I noticed was that, people were walking in the door and it was just a revolving door. Once you walk through the front door the first time, you're plugged into the system. It's like you're plugged into the matrix, and you go back out. And I realized that once people got their dose of chemo, or once people got, their diagnosis, they just walked straight out the door back into the toxic lifestyle that caused the diet and lifestyle that caused the problem. And I realized, why isn't anyone helping with the cause? Why isn't anyone helping with the diet and lifestyle? That's why they're here. So So for me, I was like, right, I got to help these people never have to walk in the door. So how do I do that? I help people with diet and lifestyle, just help them upgrade their nutrition, implement intermittent fasting schedules, because what's happening to the gastrointestinal tract, which contains, 70 to 90% of our immune system when we're not eating, is just as important as the food we're putting in our body. And so, yeah, that's the impact I want to have, to help people upgrade their nutrition and upgrade their lifestyle to one that's going to, it won't necessarily change the outcome, but to spend less time dying.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, my mom had or has cancer, and she went for chemo, and they were I was reading about intermittent fasting and things like that. In the chemo center, they're like, "Oh, have donuts, have cake, have." And I told her about the benefits of fasting and everything, and they're like, "No, you got to eat." They just don't know anything. It just made me really mad. It's just amazing that people are supposed to be helping you. They just, I don't know. They just don't know.
Yeah, and the thing is as well, it's not to be, it's to be aware of where the foundation started. So the problems we have now started 100 to 150 years ago, and every single doctor, clinician, professor, medical worker I've ever worked with and know has the best intent. They too believe they're doing the best thing, and they like my boss, he said he doesn't remember a day where he hasn't woken up at 3:30 in the morning to go to work, where he hasn't woken up concerned about a patient. Like, these people mean well. It's just that the system that we're in just lacks a few facets, which I think are going to be introduced over time. And particularly with diet in a hospital, the function of dietitians is really, especially in a cancer hospital, is to keep people alive. And when you're undergoing such toxic treatments, the very basic and Neanderthal thought is, what does the body need? It needs lots of calories. Where do we find lots of calories? In high carb, sugary foods. So that's why in hospitals, people are like, go home and eat pizzas and ice cream and all of this stuff, because it's super high calorie. But the problem is the body interprets what comes into it in two ways only. It interprets it as nutrition or toxin. The body only has two avenues for decision when it comes to our metabolism, and it's one of those. And so when you're putting in unnatural foods that have got unnatural flavors and, these concoctions of chemicals that are not natural, our body perceives that as a toxin. Now, when you have a toxic load of chemotherapy additional to the food, you're just adding to the problem. And so, that's something that's a real bugbear for me, is that knowing that these dietitians that in a hospital, which again, they mean well, they're following their education that they were given, they're doing their best. It's not that we hate them individually, it's that we hate that the system didn't give them better tools, right? And the problem that really bothers me is that, natural food that our biology and evolutionary genetics has wired into it to receive is not being provided. And that's really the tools that the body needs in order to facilitate getting rid of the cancer, especially if you're on chemo. You don't want to be adding toxic load to the body through these shitty foods, like you want to be giving it the cleanest fuel possible so it doesn't have to deal with an additional toxic load.
Well, I guess my question at this point would be, another thing I've noticed before I get to that is, if you try to eat the right foods, how do you know that they're labeled properly? How do you know that this thing you're about to eat really is organic, really raised the way, it was grass-fed beef? Or do you see any problem in that in the labeling side and people actually getting what they think they're getting when they make the right choices? Yeah,
I see a huge problem with that. And so the biggest issue is that if you're already in the produce section of the supermarket or you're at a farmer's market, you're doing the right thing. So whether you buy organic or not, that's like you're at the good end of the spectrum. I find that most of the issues and the diets and lifestyles that most of my clients and the people that walk through the front door of the hospital, they're just victims of marketing. And so was I, and so is my family, up until we sort of became aware of, again, this corporate interest and decades of manipulation of advertising and marketing and this type of thing. And so the real problems lie in the middle of the supermarket. It's not the produce or the meat around the edge, although, they've got their own problems, but we're getting at that point, we're starting to split hairs. It's the stuff in the middle that's advertised as fresh, natural sweeteners, organic on packets. Anything in a bag, a box, or a can is not good for your biology, right? That's just a good way to move forward as a general rule. Obviously, there's going to be different things that pop up, and this thing might be, and this thing won't be, but as a general rule, that's a good approach. And those words, fresh, natural particularly, they're just used to the nth degree in a context that makes absolutely no sense, because legally they're allowed to. And the other thing is that a lot of people, we're caught up in Western culture in this paradigm that calories are bad. And so when we have Diet Coke, it's like, oh, it has no calories. Well, the calories aren't the problem. There's no calorie issue there. It's the horrible artificial chemicals that you're pumping into your body. Yes, they have no caloric value, but the toxins do.
Well, I mean, even with produce, though, let's say you're going to have, certain kind of fruits and vegetables. What if they've been sprayed with pesticides? What if they haven't? What if you're going to have fish that's farm raised versus wild caught? I mean, is it enough just to have, fresh foods and prepare them yourself, or do you really have to go even further to help yourself?
Well, I guess the reality is that in this conversation, my priority is to not overwhelm people with a feeling of failure, and that's why I say, if you're in that section of the supermarket, you're already doing the right thing. And if you want to go down the conversational rabbit hole of how bad glyphosate is and how bad herbicides and pesticides are, then everyone's just going to throw their hands up in the air and say, well, who cares? I'm just going to have pizza every single day. But as I said, my mission is for people to spend less time dying. So if you get your herbicides and pesticides with a bunch of good nutrients, then that's far better than getting your herbicides and pesticides in a bag, a box, or a can with artificial flavorings and products that are not natural to your biology. So the priority really is getting those natural foods. I say if your plate looks like it came from the farm, then you're doing the right thing. Obviously, herbicides and pesticides are bad. Obviously, there's going to be some advertising and marketing in regards to the use of the word organic. And I actually did an episode of my own podcast discussing the legal definition of the word organic, and it's fairly flexible, unfortunately. But the point is that usually is going to be the best option. But again, then cost comes into it as well, right? And people have a perceived value based on, I've never really spent this much on food before, and why is this apple smaller than all the genetically modified apples kind of thing. So so I guess I really just don't want to overwhelm people into just this fatalistic mentality of, the whole world's screwed, so I might as well do what I want.
I guess you're not a clinician. You don't really treat people, but you discuss things on the podcast and informational only. But have you seen that? Are there a lot of outliers there? Are there people that really need to go whole hog and try to clean everything that they eat? Or is it enough, again, just to try to have unprocessed foods for most people or for all people?
I think the people that need to go whole hog are usually people that are either pre-disease or disease, like they need a therapeutic response. So whereas for the rest of us, it's good for us to live a lifestyle long term where we're eating, farm-based foods and, ideally naturally caught fish, naturally hunted meat is always going to be better. But again, if it looks like it came from the farm, it's good. But yeah, those people that need to go all the way, like fully commit to this, sort of quote unquote extreme health diet or lifestyle is usually going to be people in a therapeutic response. And as well, I mean, simply being overweight is something that requires a therapeutic response. You don't need to already have the condition or disease diagnosis. Like one of the biggest red flags and why I've helped people and talk a lot about weight loss is one of the big red flags before almost all disease and illness is carrying excessive fat on your body, right? So even something like that requires a therapeutic response. But then again as well, we've got the relationships with food and fat dieting, and that's also something that I don't advocate for. You shouldn't do anything unless it's sustainable. But at the same time, we need to make positive adjustments, because currently your definition of sustainable might be, the quote unquote balanced and in moderation words get you thrown around a lot, and they're just so subjective. So, we need to make a healthy change over a period of time so that gradually you become your baseline of health is really good.
So, I don't know, through all your exposure and training, podcasts, and your work at the hospital, I mean, I don't know, do you see a positive endpoint for health? Do you see us moving towards better models where more people will be healthy, or do you see things on a kind of a net negative and people are getting sicker?
I definitely think people are getting sicker, but at the same time, on the other end of the spectrum, I think the model is definitely shifting, particularly in America. And America's one of the countries that are leading the way in this combination of GP or clinician and health coach. That's becoming a real thing. And that's because a lot of doctors are realizing, excuse me, they're realizing that they don't have the capacity to help people implement. They're just instructors. They say, do this, but people behave based on their belief systems and habits that are ingrained. And those things are usually being ingrained for a long time. And pharmaceutical drugs don't have the same adherence rate to any diet, lifestyle, or any type of health intervention. And that's because the doctors don't have the skills in order to help people use their psychology in a way that achieves the result. So the model is definitely shifting. Functional medicine, I like to get a lot of functional medicine people on my podcast simply to demystify it. A lot of people that hear any of these acupuncture, I've got a Chinese medical doctor, a good friend of mine, jumping on the podcast to share the scientific research studies behind acupuncture. You know, it's all about just giving these people a platform to bring science into the conversation. I think once people realize, oh, it's not just woo-woo nonsense that came from crystals, it's like, well, no, we can test, measure, and create and replicate and reproduce these outcomes time and time and time again, then it'll move from the woo-woo category into the health category, and we'll get these more integrative and holistic health approaches through a combination of health practitioners. You know, you might have your GP who's partnered with a health coach, who's also partnered with a functional medicine doctor or a naturopath. You know, they've all got their place in the health spectrum.
Oh, that's excellent. So any big trends you see coming in medicine and in health that are going to be big game changers? You think AI actually holds promise? I mean, personalized medicine, that kind of thing. You know, I hear it talked about a lot, but what's your thoughts?
My thoughts are, there's definitely a progression towards personalized medicine through, genetic testing and microbiome testing. It's kind of like the Genome Project. They're sort of moving towards offering that for people's gut, like through their microbiome, because we've got, 500. A healthy person has 500 to 1,000 different bacterial strains, and that's not even entering the conversation of the fungus that lives in our gut and yeast molecules that live in our gut. And so they say that your gut microbiome is more personal to you than your fingerprint. Like even two twins have drastically different microbiomes, just simply because of their position in the womb. So those testings and those tools are now, really starting to come to the forefront. There's a lot of big projects that are moving forward in that direction. And I think the reality is, though, that no matter what technology is created, and all of these technological tools are amazing, until we shift the paradigm of responsibility, none of these tools are going to change people's outcome. Until we change the paradigm that I go to the doctor as if I'm a car going to the mechanic and he just replaces the parts or gives me the right fuel to put in for a couple of weeks, until we change the client or patient perspective that I am responsible for my health, my diet and lifestyle created this result. For the most part, it's rarely genetics, but for the most part, it's diet and lifestyle. Until that person has enough responsibility, the technological tools, no matter how good they are useless unless that person walks home with responsibility for creating a healthy future.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So what does that look like? Is that, in the future, what I've noticed is people, for the most part, just go along, and I was one of them for a long time too, and you just think, oh, these sicknesses are what happens to other people, and I'm fine. And I'll worry about it when it comes up. How are you supposed to, before you have something bad happen to you, how are you supposed to even pay attention to this stuff and want to?
I think the reality is that it's probably going to be a generational thing that happens, because it's a lot of our belief systems and our habits and the reason that we have a lot of things that are related to our parent, or we do a lot of things in our day behaviorally that are very similar to our parents, is because a lot of the things we learn happen and are pumped into our brain when we're essentially all in our subconscious state, and that's the ages 0 to 7. So it's really hard to break habits and old belief systems that were pumped in those years, because they're essentially cemented in there. They're like programs that we then play out. So I think the truth is that it's going to be a generation of parents. There needs to be a generation of parents where health and wellness is a priority, and they educate the children on what a healthy baseline is in order for them to grow up and live in a healthy way. Because so many of us know. Like every event I've ever spoken at, every client I've ever had, I don't need to tell them that fruits and vegetables are the thing. It's not about information. It's not about information. It's about psychology. So for the people that currently exist in the world we are right now, it's about you're working on your mindset. It's about working on your belief systems. It's about dealing with your past traumas with a psychologist, because those are the things that underpin the behaviors that you play out now. But I think in the long term, we're gonna progress towards, just an increased baseline of health, and people are going to pass that on to their kids. And I think that's what needs to happen in order to create a healthier world. It needs to be passed on to kids.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, I have kids, and I'm try to instruct them and help them too. I'm overweight, and I tell them, like, it took years and years to get like this, but it's going to take years and years for me to fix it, seems like. And I don't want that to happen to them. So trying to do the same thing and give them a better shot at it than I had, more information.
Yeah, that's great. And that's an important thing with my clients, and a really important motivator for them too, is that once they understand that we got here as a result of, a combination of belief systems and incorrect information through marketing and advertising, once we understand that really provides motivation and tools to ensure that we're putting that information into our kids' head in the right way. And the good thing is, the younger they are, the better that information is going to be for them, because it cements it right into the subconscious of the brain.
Well, very good. So what's the best way for people to get more exposure to you? I like what you have to say, and it's well said.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. How can they find your podcast, and how can they find out more about the programs you have and everything?
Yes, so the How to Not Get Sick and Die podcast is on virtually any app, the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, all of the apps that are out there for podcasts, which is really exciting. I have a lot of amazing guests, just like you, Richard. I've had you on there. It's been great. So also Instagram, so just at Matty Lansdown, and LinkedIn as well, so at Matty Lansdown. So pretty much all the usual social media, Facebook, Instagram. It's all just, and my website as well, just mattylansdown.com.
That's great. Well, Matty, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks for inviting me on. I really appreciate it. And thanks for doing such a great podcast. You've got so many episodes, and I've listened to a bunch of them, and you've given so much value. Cool. So congratulations for that.
I'm trying.
You're doing well.
Excellent.
You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you.